Hi, everyone, and welcome to Rewinding Founders. My name is Adi, and today we'll be talking to Brad Vanstone, grandson of a dairy farmer turned plant based cheese and butter producer. Brad co founded Willicroft in 2018 and in 2020 made Mother Nature their CEO to ensure nature was placed at the center of every decision they make. I am super interested in hearing how you got to that decision and how do you even do the switch from a family that is like that to being a plant-based producer?
No, thank you very much for having me. So before Willicroft, I was working for a number of different startups. So I actually, as a kid, I was always, I guess hustling is probably the best word. So I can remember buying multiple packs of Coca-Cola at the co-op, taking them to the playground and selling them for a small profit. So I think that was my first $1 million idea. um, but yeah, I always loved building things from scratch, and I initially joined a couple of other people's projects out of university, so working for other startups. Pretty much always focused on growing the business. So I took a media company over to the US, and then a edtech company from the Netherlands into the UK and the Nordics. And then during that whole phase, when I was living in Amsterdam, I started to eat plant-based myself, and I started to I guess become a lot more conscious of my personal impact on the planet, and just really struggled to find good alternatives to cheese, and did a lot of research into the space and saw that there was actually quite a big gap. And yeah, I had a very strong dairy upbringing through my grandparents who were dairy farmers, and actually it was quite nice to see everything sort of roll full circle. And although this industry is very different to dairy, my grandparents started to feed the nation after the Second World War, and I think that one of the major topics about plant-based businesses today is trying to find a new way of feeding people that also tackles some big existential crises. So I think there are differences and similarities, should we say.
Interesting. How do you think doing a food tech startup is different than a regular startup? Because I can
Mm.
see different challenges, maybe.
Yeah, I think food is still incredibly human. Every single day we've all got to eat. The supply chains are still, there's a human being behind every component, and yes, there's tech behind a lot of it, and the whole food tech space is a bit of a buzz right now. It's still an immensely human oriented industry, and so that's a cool thing and a struggle. Humans, we come with a lot of great capacities, but also challenges. And so I think, especially when it comes to scale and producing things exactly the same way on repeat, that is inevitably a challenge. And so I personally think it's one of the things I like the most about it, because the relationships are still very human, and you can't just automate everything. You've got to really kind of build things from a solid base. But it is definitely more of a slog, and I think the patience required to build a food company is at the same level as, say, building a tech company. And actually, in my eyes, it takes 10 years to build a holistic food business, and you're really given 5. So you're playing catch up from the get-go.
Interesting. And before you were doing this, you
Mm,
were doing growth for different companies, which is a very interesting and useful background to have as a
mm,
startup founder. Do you think
mm.
that affected you much in the way you approached things?
Yeah, I think I had to kind of check my own background, I guess, when I was starting Willicroft, because actually my remit before was just to grow the business, like nothing else really. That was my focus, and if I was doing that, I was succeeding. Whereas Willicroft, the whole intention was to create something that could sustain people and the planet. And so inevitably challenges the whole basis of growth. But in order to challenge dairy, we also need a thriving plant-based sector. So there's like a bit of a dichotomy there. So I think I've always been comfortable with Willicroft growing to a certain size, provided we set up the foundations really strong. So provided we really understood how we reach things like net positivity and how we kind of run the business on a day-to-day, and the values that we not only put forward but actually stand behind. And I think we've done a pretty good job on that level. Like it's a never-ending battle, I think, to live up to those things, and it is really hard to create a holistic business when the whole financial models really are just based around trying to get food on people's plates at as low a price as possible, with no real reward for nutrition or emissions reduction. But it's changing, and yeah, you got to keep knocking on the door to make those things like have value. So yeah, I think it's something we've been very conscious of.
Interesting. And as you were building and growing, did anything surprise you? Did you think it was going to be this way?
Pretty much everything surprised me, I would say. I didn't necessarily have a vision on. I mean, I had a sort of, I guess, a North Star or somewhere I wanted it to get to, but a lot of what I did, I just kind of let it play out, especially in the earlier years. I think one of the best things I did early on was not worry too much about the distant future too much, because I would never have sat down at my desk the next morning. I kind of let the smaller, I try to win mini battles and just say, okay, how do I get to the end of this week? What do I need to do to make a few small steps forward? But yeah, I think more specifically, I've been quite surprised by just how powerful the big companies are in food. It is really hard to break through. I'm also still really surprised about how little focus there is on nutrition or major climate goals. You know, most of the subsidies and money just goes towards products being sold at a low price that are pretty unnutritious and not very good for the environment. So that surprises me, because all the talk is about the opposite. And also the role of the consumer. Like the consumer it's so confusing for just an average consumer walking into a supermarket. There's a million messages, a million different labels. The supermarket dictates what the consumer sees and how they interact with certain products. So yeah, the supermarkets are just so powerful, and yeah, I think that was a surprise to me, because I thought we'd be able to influence that a little bit more.
Interesting. And how do you even start a food tech company? Because when I look at software, even a lot of different industries, it's more clear how you get your foot in the door. You start marketing, you do stuff, but with food, there's regulations. You need to, actually make stuff. How does it work?
Yeah. Well, I think a little bit like software, in the sense that you need a great product to start with. So that was our focus initially, was just really on the product. And of course, you need like an MVP, you need to get going. It's not going to be perfect to begin with, but yeah, you need a bit of a vision on that part. And for us, that was something that was actually holistic, because we felt that all of the plant-based cheese available and in time plant-based butter was pretty processed, didn't have any kind of clear climate differences that it was showcasing towards dairy. You know, it felt like it was kind of kicking the can down the road, like maybe solving one problem but creating another. So yeah, we basically wanted to create plant-based cheeses that could tackle all of those things, which is a challenge because, as I said, the financial systems don't really reward that, and the consumer doesn't really want to pay for that. But I still felt that that's the only food system I can kind of get behind is that kind of product. So yeah, once we had a really good product in place, we were then looking at scaling the project, and that's actually probably one of the biggest challenges in food. We've all made delicious things in our own kitchens, I'm sure, but doing that at scale is super challenging, especially when you're bringing things like fermentation to the table, because you need to repeat that process like time and time again. Getting a stable shelf life, and then setting up all of the logistics around that. There's just a lot of hands that it passes through, and so we relied a lot of the time on really good partners. So I think it's really important to pick what you're going to be good at in the chain in food, because if you try and do it all yourself, good luck to you. So we were very much focused on the R&D, and then building the brand, and also working on the impact side of it. So we outsourced production, we outsourced distribution, and to a certain extent sales as well. So yeah, picking and choosing those battles was really key.
And how did you balance? It sounds like you were always really about making this a company that is not just making money, but really, Mother Nature. So how do you really balance that on a day-to-day basis where you need, to pay people's salaries and to keep growing?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably been the biggest challenge, because we've raised investment, so we still are at the point where we've broken even. We've had to try and find investors that view. So doing things in a holistic way and not just trying to get a return over a short period. So I think probably we could have done a better job at that, in the sense that I think it needed 8 to 10 years to get to profitability, and we pitched an idea on 5 or 6. That was our pitch to investors, so therefore we have people disappointed. And so if I was starting afresh, I would very much do things this holistic way, but I would set longer time frames, because we just haven't been able to influence all these different parts of the chain as much as we would have liked, and there's been inevitable delays, and it hasn't moved as quickly as I would have liked. So that part has been a challenge for sure.
Interesting. I hope. Actually, it's an interesting question. You have co-founders or a co-founder?
Yes, yeah, co-founder Margot, yeah.
And are you all aligned on this goal were you all aligned from the start? Or was it different people looking at it in different ways?
On the notion of making a holistic business, for sure. So that was the reason everyone joined the company at various different phases. On certain parts of the strategy, we've obviously had points of difference at certain moments, but the overarching aim very much aligned. And I started it initially, and Margot joined about a year and a half in, and it was, I think, part of the reason she was really excited about joining was the values and the fact that we were trying to change parts of the food industry and not just creating another food business that was doing the same thing.
How did you meet each other?
Actually, we've been so lucky with how we've met most of the team. We haven't done too many formal interviews. We've just met through people or through events. And Margot was quite similar. So when I first started Willicroft, I was just trying to learn about what it took to make a sustainable business. So I ran this series of events outside of Willicroft where once a month I just get a load of speakers from a different industry, and we just have a discussion about what they were doing to try and change that space. So one of the talks was on fashion, and we had these 3 awesome startups speak, and Margot was just in the audience. So we got chatting, and it's perfect timing. I was looking for someone to kind of operationalize things and run the finances, and that was Margot's expertise. So it happened very, very organically.
How did you convince her to join, or did she convince you?
Now to really rack my memory, I think it was a little bit of a combination. I think she definitely wanted to work for this kind of company, but I I think it was well, almost certainly just the mission and the values that we were putting forward. I think the role as well was quite suited to her. She was working for a bank, so totally different experience, and yeah, she just wanted to cut all the formalities and just be in the driving seat. So I think combination of mission and being able to like really influence things is what did it.
And how confident were you when you were just getting started, when you were still in that stage?
I was pretty. I was probably a combination of confidence, naivety. Yeah.
You have to have it, or you wouldn't have started.
Yeah. Ignorance was bliss back in the day. Yeah.
Has the idea changed much from when you first started, or was it always cheese, plant?
It's changed a lot. I mean, some of it is just sort of evolutions, I guess, but a lot of what we've done, I think, has really transformed. So, for example, we now have added butter to the portfolio. I never really wanted to go outside of cheese because there's 2,000 different cheeses, but we've also seen that plant-based cheese is actually growing quite slowly, and plant-based butter was already quite substantial, and so we had the opportunity to go into that, and I'm really glad we did. I think I've also become a lot more aware of how important fermentation is. We had some initial products that were fermented, but we had some complexities in production, so we cut those. But we're now moving much more into that space. The butter's the first product there, and yeah, I think that on the supply chain side, that's where I was very naive. So I just presumed we're gonna be running a plant-based business. It's going to be way better for the environment, and actually, just because it's plant-based doesn't mean it's ticking all the boxes. So we've done a lot of work there to really measure the emissions, to look at the supply chain in a lot of detail. We've cut nuts out of our products, for example, moved on to local beans and pulses. So I think there's been a lot of learning on that side. Yeah, I'd say those are probably the biggest areas which I've been a bit sort of blown away by. There's in food you're always learning something, but yeah, those are probably the big ones.
Interesting. Have you had big moments throughout the years where, or maybe even small moments where you were like, wow, we're going in the right direction, and close before or after signs of like, oh no, what is happening? Like these ups and downs?
Yeah, the biggest one by far was when we got our first retail listings. So we got listing in Albert Heijn and Waitrose in very quick succession, and it was massive scale up, like probably 10x on what we were producing before, at least, I'd say. And first productions hit the shelf, all seemed to be fine, and then we start getting messages on socials and various other things that there was a ceiling issue with the products. So basically the shelf life was a quarter of what it should be. Not in every product, but the machine was just not sealing the products with our co-packer. So yeah, when that happens, it's a bit of sort of Pandora's box. So yeah, the champagne was on ice from that point forward, and it was just horrible 2 months from there, because we then had produced further batches. We weren't exactly sure which had been produced, and having to refund all these customers. The supermarkets charge a bomb if they get a refund request. So that was a very brutal experience. And the frustrating thing was we use a co-manufacturer, so they are the ones who should be, checking the products and sealing the products correctly. And it was just like a basic error in their production site. Very easy to fix, but very painful. And we basically took the entire hit reputationally. So didn't get listings for a little bit of time. Got kicked out of both the supermarkets. So that really stunted us. Yeah, it was a very painful experience. So we then went into these factories, and any factory we worked in after, and just wrote these manuals on, what to check. And it's kind of weird doing that in someone else's factory. You won't come and I'm not going to come onto your podcast and go, right, have you turned your mic on? Have you, is the lighting right? Those kind of things. You just think, well, that's something you're going to take care of because you're the
That's
host.
crazy.
So painful, but a good learning. Don't take anything for granted. Yeah, that was bittersweet, that experience. So when we got in the second time, we weren't celebrating. We were
You were ready.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, that sounds so stressful. But it sounds like you figured it out. Like you bounced back.
We figured it out, and that's actually when we moved away from cashews. So we used it as a chance to kind of reset, because we just actually found out about these emissions and the emissions of cashews, and we then actually had this opportunity to have a bit of a clean slate. So we used it to our advantage. We made the best of the situation, is the probably better way of putting it. Without that, maybe we would have just not changed the recipes. Maybe we would have continued. So I'd like to think not, but yeah, it was good.
Cool. Is there any specific moment that you remember, like, that was so exciting, like in the journey, like most exciting thing that happened?
When we were releasing the butter, we were so stoked about this product. All the feedback was insane, and we had a producer we were going to work with, and they decided they couldn't work with the allergen. We could see it coming, so it wasn't the end of the world, but we basically had 4 months to find a new producer. And we went up to Denmark to this butter factory, and everything was resting on this factory. Like, it had to go well, and I went up there for just a small trial with Moritz, who's our R&D guy, and we just wanted to produce 50 kilos, and this it was kind of all resting on this trial, and it was the depths of winter, February, and we had it was this tiny little town up in the fjords.
And you just won your 50 kilos of butter.
We go into this enormous factory. It's barely daylight. It's like 10 a.m. And they nailed the production run. It tasted amazing. It formed into perfect blocks. So that was very, very satisfying, because we really felt, everything had gone from, 1 month before being in real dire straits to, looking really promising. So that was a very happy trip for sure.
Amazing. How did you end up getting your first investors? Was it before, after you were actually making sales?
Yeah, very early stage sales. So the very first year, I basically just did everything out of my apartment. So I produced, packed, did everything out of here. And then I would go to markets or sell to stores, just directly. So I had customers, but it was pretty modest. So I did an accelerator at the same time. And at the end of that accelerator, basically met some investors, and we chatted over a period of time. And yeah, after 3-4 months, they invested. So it happened quite nicely, quite naturally. I think it's always a question of like when to take on investment. I've definitely learned by doing on the investment side. I was amazed at how there's not really like a how-to or a kind of a guidebook as such. It's very, everyone I speak to on investment has a different story to tell. I guess that's a little bit the nature of the beast. But I think having done this process once, there's things I would do differently next time for sure.
What would you tell a founder who's raising money for the first time? Like, what should they do and not do?
Well, I think you really always want to ask the question, like, do I really need the money? And is it enough to really get me to where I want to get to? Because I think people often raise money because they think it's the right thing to do, or the natural flow of running a startup. And actually, the minute you raise investment, you've got people you're then somewhat beholden to, and if they can influence what you're going to do, they can definitely kind of add layers of oversight there, and kind of just follow up that's needed. And that's all fine and well if the plan's really clear and the need is there. But I think a lot of founders raise too early, and then also not enough. Like, it's easy to take what's given, and I think if you do that too many times, the idea gets watered down, and actually you end up achieving very little because you just can't, you're treading water essentially, or you're already doing it for 6 months and then you're back at the table. I think one of the biggest changes which I'd love to see in investment is giving founders 18 to 24 months rather than sort of between 6 to 18, because you close a round, you then start implementing, and before you know it, you're back at the table, discussing this, the round again. So I just don't think there's enough time or patience with ideas. You need some time to change gears, to make some mistakes, and with 6 to 18 month windows, especially in food where you've got these long listing cycles. I mean, you might wait 6 months before you can actually speak to the buyer, and then they'll say, okay, you can have a listing in 6 months time, and then you've only got a few months to prove traction. So it's just constantly against the clock. So I think those are kind of things I would look at. And there's also a lot of different types of financing. We weren't aware of too many grants when we first started. We also weren't too aware of the different types of crowdfunding you could do, things like convertible notes. And I think it's really good to look at all the different types of options, because I think people just jump at angel VC investment, and there's a time and a place for it for sure, but it's not for everyone.
Interesting. So before we started this interview, you told me some exciting news that you guys are selling the company.
Yeah, no, it's kind of bittersweet, I must say, because it's a couple of years early. So to delve into what I've just mentioned, but with personal experience, we've basically been raising for a year now. This would be our third proper round. We've done a couple of alternative financing in between, and we got 40% pretty quickly. We got very close with a number of investors, but just couldn't get it over the line. So we basically had to sell the business. It's definitely earlier than I would have liked, because we've only had the butter on the market for 6 months. We're 6 years in. As I said, I think it takes 10 years to build a holistic food business. So there's avenues here where we can stay involved, but there's also buyers that might just take it in a different direction. Yeah, it's an interesting phase, this, because yeah, it's all I've known for 6 years, and it's there's like a combination of emotions, a little bit of relief because it's been a slog at times. I also feel like a lot of gratitude because I've learned way more than I've ever learned in anything else. And then I'm also very excited about what comes next. And it could also be an iteration of something within Willicroft. So yeah, it's an interesting time.
Interesting. I guess it's probably too soon to ask, but do
Yeah,
you see yourself getting into food tech again?
I really want to stay in food in some capacity. What I'm feeling particularly strongly about at the moment is trying to influence some of the legislation a little bit further up, because I think some of our biggest challenges have been just the playing field. So it's crazy in this day and age that actually it's harder to run a plant-based business than it is a dairy business. Um, I'm actually not someone who wants to just see the total unraveling and removal of dairy overnight. I think there should be a transition, and there will inevitably be always some kind of meat and dairy, but the kind of power and the scale of where that sits needs to change drastically. And yeah, we're all talking about reducing emissions and changing diets, but there's really very little legislation that supports that. And I came into this thinking that business drives the change, but actually coming out of it, I think the legislation is so important. We need some kind of carbon tax. We need subsidies to at least be removed from dairy. I'm not necessarily saying they should be shifted onto plant-based, but we shouldn't be propping up a highly polluting, emitting industry. And I'm very much in favor of farmers being transitioned and taught new skills, and not just having their farms taken from them. Definitely not want to support that, but yeah, we definitely need to change quite a few things on that level. So I'm quite impassioned to go into that, because I think changing those things could help myself or in the same position in 5 years' time, running a similar type of business, or anyone starting a business in plant-based, so much more. And I think it's probably the thing that's held us back the most.
Interesting. So it sounds like this journey really changed who you are, like the way you see your future. Because if you go more into the legislation side, it's quite far from like starting a startup. What do you think? Like, tell me more about that. Like, how do you?
Yeah.
When you see yourself,
Well,
what changed?
I think it's definitely more of a political focus, and I look at some of the projects we've done over the last 4 or 5 years, and some of the ones where we've gone and localized our white bean production, or at least started that process. I've loved going into something like that and connecting various different people. So there were so many farmers interested, but they weren't talking to any experts to learn how to grow beans. They didn't know anyone actually wanted to grow local proteins. They didn't realize that they could get some support for that. And so actually, like, all the ingredients were there, but it just needed, like, all we've done is just connect the dots. We've not gone and planted white beans ourselves. So it was a really interesting example, I think, of how actually there's so much good stuff going on. There's so much infrastructure there. And we don't need to make drastic shifts, but we do just need to I think, like, shift the focus and things. And I think that's kind of what's needed on a grander scale with, say, carbon tax, for example. There's a clear need to realign where we place value, and a farmer doesn't need to receive less income, but they should be rewarded for other things like nature, sort of focused farming, or growing a local protein source, or doing regenerative dairy as opposed to industrial dairy. So yeah, there's all the knowledge is there. I think a lot of the infrastructure is there. It's just needs a bit of a realignment. And yeah, I can go out and create an amazing product, but if the price is too high, and if the market just isn't there for it, then there's only so much impact that it can have. So I think something needs to shift a little bit further up the chain to then enable companies to really kind of turn the needle on consumption and eating patterns, basically. So that's the theory anyway.
Interesting. It takes me back to, you said that in 2020 you named Mother Nature your CEO.
Yeah.
What happened then that like you decided to make that declaration?
Yeah, that was in a very formative time when we'd had about a year together with the sort of founding team, and we basically wanted to make sure that we were beholden to a higher purpose, and to ensure that as we grew as a business, we still kept the initial intentions quite pure, and I guess serving the planet and nature, as opposed to just selling a product, was a much kind of higher goal. It's something which we've really fed into the decision making, the day-to-day running of the business since then. That's another, I think, change that we need to see more broadly across companies at large, not just in food. Is at the moment a company is basically beholden to its investors, and to a certain degree its employees, but only now are we seeing legislation that actually makes it look at all stakeholders. And so this notion of Mother Nature, or the environment being the main purpose, is I think something we really need to enshrine. And there's some really cool stuff being done on this. There was a report made recently by Faith in Nature and B Lab, just looking at nature governance in general. And this is also a really exciting space, because if all companies have to be beholden to the planet, that is as effective, if not more effective, as a carbon tax or realigning subsidies. That's also something maybe to go into next.
Interesting. It makes me think, have you gotten any criticism from people around you, maybe other entrepreneurs, maybe potential investors that probably didn't invest, about like you care too much about the ideals, or this is not how you do business? Have you gotten any of that?
Yeah, for sure. Probably one of the biggest criticisms we've had, I would say. And one of the reasons that people haven't invested. And it's not because they don't agree with it. It's just that their financial model just doesn't fit into our view. And to a certain degree, they're kind of right if you're looking solely from a profitability standpoint. But I still believe the two go in tandem. You know, if all we do is take without nurturing and giving back, then we don't need to be a rocket scientist to see what the end result of that is. So I will always kick back on that. And I personally think it's really important to build solid foundations and holistic foundations at the beginning, as opposed to creating something commercially successful and then changing it further down the line, because there's very, very few examples of companies that make that shift when they become successful, because the business model is built on something that doesn't take those factors into consideration. So it either works in the early years or it doesn't. And yeah, you could challenge Willicroft and say, well, it hasn't worked, but I don't think it's because we've done things in a holistic way. I think it's because we haven't commercialized certain parts at the right moment, or if we'd have had the butter on the market earlier than we had, that also would have been changed things quite drastically. So yeah, the reasons that we haven't got to where we wanted to get to is not our sort of holistic vision, I don't think. You could question the speed, but yeah, then you don't have that holistic nature in place.
Cool. How did you balance throughout the years? Since this is, I guess it's true to all startups, but especially when you're in a food tech, seems like a smaller niche, like more connected to each other. How
Yeah.
did you balance, on the one hand, you have all the work you have to do, like actual work, and then staying in touch with the community, building your network, making connections? Like, was that ever a balance?
Yeah, I think going back to what I was saying earlier about how it's a very human industry, it's quite easy to stay in touch with people, I think, depending on where you're placed, I guess. I mean, we're in Amsterdam. There's such a thriving scene here across so many of the big, exciting parts of the food tech scene. So there's a lot of events, there's a lot of communities. There's basically a lot of touch points to engage with people. So I think it's a little bit my personality as well. I love those parts of the role. So I will always look to be present at events and things. But yeah, it's also easy to get caught up in your bubble at certain moments, for sure. I mean, we very early on were quite collaborative with some more sort of broader values-based, impact-based projects, and then having seen how that benefited us, we're very active with some of our R&D projects, and always wanted to really be on the pulse of what the customer was thinking as well. I started by doing markets, and then we had a store. So it was really important to always just have that customer connection as well. So yeah, I think it's really pretty fundamental actually to a food tech business. And I do see food tech businesses that are lurking in the shadows a little bit on that side, like engaging with customers, and it can be maybe a bit more of a research-led project, and until you really get out and understand what the customer really thinks. You can never have too much feedback on that level, I don't think. So I think that's one thing we've done well.
How did you get your first customers?
They didn't really have a choice, I guess, because I was on a market and it was a very small strip, so they had to walk past the stand. No, I basically was making some iterations for 6 months, and my friends tried them one evening and convinced me to go and do a market a couple of weeks later, which I did. The market went really well, and then I quit my job and started to do many more of them. So it happened very, very quickly. I'd say
So how long did it take from conception of idea to I'm quitting my job?
Yeah, well, whilst I was making it for the 6 months, it wasn't really an idea of a business, to be honest. I was just doing it as a hobby, because I loved cheese, and I really struggled with not getting good quality cheese when I was when I started eating plant-based. So I had to find a solution there. So yeah, I was just making it for myself and my partner basically, and then from that evening where they devoured the cheeses, it was probably it was 2 weeks. Yeah.
Bold move. How supportive was your environment when you got started? When you were like, okay, I'm quitting my job, this is becoming a thing.
Mixed. Yeah, they I think my family were pretty supportive. My partner was very supportive. My parents, medium. My friends, very supportive. My grandparents were very inquisitive because it was, going against their entire livelihoods. So it was mixed. I felt a little bit of pressure there, across the family, just because, it felt like a real, it was just going against my upbringing, and yeah, a lot of, I placed a lot of, I guess, emphasis on that side of things in my character and my family's background, and it was quite a tough couple of years as all of these things started to become contradictory, and not particularly positive for the future. So it was a little bit of a battle, but it all happened from there in a very nice way. We had lots of good conversations about it, and it wasn't sort of swept under the carpet. It was something we really talked about, and my grandpa and I got on super well. So we would speak a lot about it, and he, by the end, he was completely sold on the idea, and he was my biggest supporter. So it was, by and large, it was quite a supportive experience.
What do you think about yourself, like a trait or a behavior that you had that helped you get through the first stages of, I need to prove myself?
I think it was just the constant energy to just go out and make things happen, and not to get too caught up in the obvious barriers that were in place. So to really focus on small gains, and getting slowly but surely to the next phase, and being incredibly inquisitive. So really just saying, okay, I know nothing about this space, but I'm going to learn really fast, and I'm going to, just not place any big audacious sort of target on my back. I'm just going to go out and see where this takes me. And doing that on a small level for a year really helped me to then develop a semblance of the company that I wanted to create, where I saw the opportunity, where I saw the pain points from the customers. It allowed me to really work on the products. So rather than just going like completely in stealth mode on, say, just designing the product in-house and not getting any feedback, or doing a load of research into the industry and then finding out that, actually this data was inaccurate, I kind of did a little bit of everything to then have an understanding of, I guess, the bigger picture. And I'm not saying it was the perfect approach, but it worked out pretty well for the first few years. No point in chasing perfection. So I think that's fair.
Also, I would say that, like, if you were to start the company now, knowing what you know now, I bet you
Mm.
could get it to the same position in like a year, probably. Like the,
Yeah,
you think
hindsight is a wonderful
2020?
thing. Yeah, exactly. But I think by learning by doing, although it's quite painful, it really sticks then. Um, so I'm very glad the way we've done it. I definitely wouldn't do it exactly the same way again, but there's next to nothing I would change.
Is there any specific growth tactic that you used that was incredibly successful?
Hmm, good question. Um, I think on the kind of communication side, we found the best way to really affiliate and to show that we had really high quality products, because everyone's screaming and shouting about how good their products are, was to attach them to really top chefs. So with the butter, we got it into 10 Michelin star restaurants. And if we said, okay, that the butter is, has XYZ qualities, okay, that might land with a few people, but just having that stamp of approval for our top people in the culinary space just did that without us having to say anything, without them even having to say anything other than the fact they're using it. So it's a little bit of a tried and tested method. I'm definitely not claiming to be the first person to use Top Chefs, but it was, the only cost was time. And yeah, it said a lot about the versatility, the quality of the product. So I think that was very effective. And yeah, just in terms of just staying in the media and staying relevant, I think also when you do things in a holistic way, these are the sort of topics that people are talking about, and it should not be the reason that they're being done, but it is a good way of getting a lot of media without paying for anything. We've never actually, we have once paid for an article, and it was a waste of money. So yeah, I think those are probably the best things we've done on those levels.
Cool. Okay, so two final questions.
Mm,
One, what is one thing that you learned throughout the last 6 years that you
mm,
think all founders should know? Anyone who wants to start a company should know that.
mm. Oof, wow. Yeah, I think it's really important to ask yourself at the beginning and constantly throughout, like, what do I want and need? Because I certainly found that I put my wants and needs at certain moments to the back burner, I would say. Um, and yeah, if you're running your own project, you're going to be going a million miles per hour. So I think it's really important to look after yourself and yeah, have a couple of non-negotiables that, or non-starters that you have from the outset and that you stick to. And that was not something which I became aware of until halfway through, and then I it wasn't implemented in our business, so there were already expectations or things that I was doing, which I had to keep up to. Um, so I think that's something that would definitely have helped me throughout.
Amazing. And one final question. And before that, I'll say thank you so much for your time. I think you really, like, it's such an expertise to, you're not only starting a company, but you learn so much and your direction for the future is so interesting. Like, it's so uncommon for a founder to be like, yeah, I'm gonna sell my company, and now I'm gonna do things with legislation, which I think is really,
Mm.
really cool. What advice would you give yourself of 6 years ago?
Mm.
You know what? Let me change that. Not what
Mm.
advice, but what would you say? What would you tell him?
Um, yeah, to be honest, I would just say go and enjoy the ride. Because any advice that I now have is with hindsight, and it's super useful knowledge, but it's knowledge that wouldn't have had relevance in that moment in time because hindsight is yeah, you can't necessarily apply it. No, I honestly I wouldn't change anything because it's taught me so much. So there's many things I wouldn't do again, but telling me back then, there's nothing I would have said to myself other than just enjoy it. Maybe enjoying it is actually the point, because you make a big deal out of a lot of things at certain moments, and actually you get through them, you look back, you smile. Sometimes you don't smile at them, but it's useful. And so just you shouldn't sort of put down emotion. It's good to feel how you feel in the moment, but at the same time it's good also not to sort of beat yourself up about a situation, and to just know you're going to get through it, and find a good solution that works for everyone. So I'm 33. I've got hopefully many more of these again. I don't want to be taking these. I don't want this same journey at 63, but I'm totally fine with what's happened today.
Perfect. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.